So at this point, we're going to be starting to model our exterior scene. Now I know that we haven't gone through the exterior references yet, but we'll get to that soon. First of all, we have to learn how we can create a terrain. We have already gone through this, but we haven't approached it for an exterior scene such as this one. So let me just show you my reference that I have for this particular project. And here it is. So we're actually still working with the holiday house by Playa Architects. And in this scene, we have multiple objects that we can scatter around in order to learn the method of scattering in a modeled terrain. Obviously, again, first of all, we have to model this kind of topography here. So we actually have a little bit of slope coming from the right side all the way to the left side. So let's go ahead and model this. So our first step is to create a new layer. So let's go ahead to the create new layer icon. And as always, we're going to be writing our prefix EM, and I'm going to name it terrain. Now we know that in order to model this, we need a high poly mesh. And it's basically just a plane that we have to use. So let's go into our command panel and create this plane. Let's have a second look at our reference image. So I'm basically just going to create a rectangle and then populate it with some polygons so that we can start playing around with our paint deformation tool. Okay, so we've created that rectangle. So now we actually need to give this slope that we had on our reference image. So we're going to go to our parameters, and for now I'm going to leave these segments as 1 by 1 because it's easy for me to work with an editable poly. So I'm going to right click and convert this to an edit poly. Now I'm going to pick both of these edges and go to my edit edges tab. So I have plenty of options. Let's just open the edit edges. And I'm going to be connecting it 2 times because I'm going to be using the vertices from this left side to bring them down a little bit so that I can start modeling this slope. Okay, that should be enough because it's not a very pronounced one, so this is more than enough. Alright, now we can add a camera to this scene. So I'm going to go to the positive icon, Corona Cam, and let's go to a top view so that I can make it a front perspective. I'm going to be applying our basic parameters to this camera. So let's go to the modifiers, and in focal length, we know that we can use something in between 17 to 24 or 25 millimeters. So I'm going to go for 24 for now. Also applying an automatic vertical tilt. And while selecting the camera, I'm going to write in 120 centimeters. And let's take it from there. So let's go to another viewport. In this case, I already have my interior scene, which we have already studied on our last lecture. So I'm going to go to this scene over here. Now, if I press the C key, I'll be selecting my camera 2. Now let's go to a clay mode for this viewport and F4 to show our edges. And now Shift plus F just to bring these settings for our camera. Okay, so this needs a little bit of editing. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see our reference image once again. And we're pretty close to this. You can see that the architecture here is actually close to the camera. And in this foreground, we have the tree just to give a little bit more of depth to the scene. So let's go back, and the only thing that we have to do is actually to just give a little bit more of sky space to this scene. So let's go back to our reference image. You can see how much space of sky we have in here, and we do not have that much space left for the terrain. So let's go ahead and fix this, and we can do this by just using our camera target. So let's go to camera 2 again, select camera, and now right click and select the camera target. So let's just bring this up a little bit so that we end up with lots of sky space up here. Okay, something like this will do. Now the purpose of this exercise is mostly to model our terrain and to see how the chaos scatter works. So let's not go all the way into our camera right now. So let's go ahead and pick our plane. Let's go to this viewport over here, and I'm going to pick the vertices and bring them all the way so that the camera can actually grab it. Okay, now the next step is to go into the Edit Geometry tab and start populating this plane with more polygons. just press this a couple of times until we have something like this. Actually, this is a little bit too much. Let's just Ctrl Z there for a bit. And now we can go to the Paint Deformation tab and use our Push and Pull tool. We already know how this works, so I'm going to just give it a little bit of more brush size. Let's go for 100 and let's go actually to 200. I know the push and pull value, it's a little bit too low. We can go ahead and type in 15. So now we can start applying some irregularities to this mesh. So first of all, in the foreground, we can actually see that we have this irregularity that comes from the soil and also the tree coming up and so on. So let's do that in the foreground, and we need to be actually seeing our viewport so that we don't overdo it. Okay, so first of all, we have something like this. And then after the soil section, the grass starts to come in. So all of the ground must have certain irregularity because it's out in the forest, obviously. So we need to make this as real as possible. We're not in the city, so nothing here is concrete, and the topography is very irregular. Because we are not using all of this space, and if we press just the 7 key, we can see that we already have 347,000 polygons. So we can reduce the number of polygons once we are happy with the camera position, because then we can just select all of the polygons which are not grabbed by our camera and delete them. Play with this a little bit more. And I need just a little bit of more detail on our foreground, and I'm starting to see that we actually need a little bit more of polygons here. So I'm going to deselect my push and pull, and let's go to our mesh smooth and put in another layer of polygons there. Let's go back to our push and pull, and let's actually make this a little bit smaller, so 150 will do. And now in this foreground, I'm going to give it a little bit more of detail. Remember that if you just hit your Alt key, you can start doing the opposite of the push action. Something like this. So just in our foreground will be enough. Okay, something like this will do. And if you find that your mesh is a little bit too hard, we can start to relax it. So up here we have that option, and now you can see how the meshes here start to be a little bit more soft. Okay, so I think that's more than enough for now, because we're going to be applying a corona scatter to this so that we can have this grass going on in here. First of all, let's get rid of the polygons that we have here. So I'm going to pick our polygons option, and all of these over here are actually not getting through the camera except for this part at the background. So I'm going to deselect it, and it's actually all of this. Okay, so there we go. Something like this should do. And I'm also going to be grabbing this side over here. Okay, so let's be careful not to be grabbing whatever goes into our camera there. Okay, so that's it. We're going to be deleting this extra polygons there. We can also start to delete what we have at the back of our camera. So maybe this corner over here, and also this side, and finally our actual back of the camera there. Let's delete all of this. Okay, great. So now let's bring our chaos corona. So in this positive icon, go into our standard primitives, and down here we have the chaos option. In here we have the chaos scatter. So let's bring it in, and the chaos scatter is actually going to be letting us scatter objects to a certain mesh. So in this case, what I want to do is to start scattering our grass. So I'm going to actually be using the grass that we got from Quixel Bridge. If you didn't subscribe to it, don't worry about it. You can just use a 3D asset from the Cosmos browser. The quality of it is enough. So I'm going to open my Quixel Bridge now. so now let's just go to 3D plants. Let's go to our grass options, and here are our grass clumps. So let's just export this to 3ds Max. If you don't know what's going on in here, make sure to be checking out the last lecture. So I'm just going to hit export. Okay, let's go back to our 3ds Max and drag this model all the way over here. Now let's bring it close to our cow scatter, and I'm going to be renaming this cow scatter. So let's go to its modifiers, and up here we have the cow scatter 001. I'm just going to be renaming it as grass. Okay, so how does this cow scatter work? So if we select it and go to its modifiers, here we will have two different options. We have the distribute on target objects, which in this case it's going to be the mesh that we want to distribute this grass onto. So let's select it, and we can do that by clicking on this positive icon and selecting our mesh, which is basically our terrain, right? Now I can also rename this plane here to be called terrain. And now if I go back to my cow scatter, this is a bit more clear for me. So next, I'm going to decide what type of model objects are going to be instanced into this mesh. So I'm going to be separating this 3 types of models that I got, and I think we'll be fine using this one, which is not that populated as the model over here. So let's grab this one, and I'm going to also be renaming it. So let's just rename it grass. And make sure to have your model, which is going to be instanced into this mesh, close to your cow's scatter rectangle, because sometimes our models are going to be very small, and it's better to have them close to the cow scatter geometry here so that we can find them right away. And I'm actually going to be putting it on the top there. Okay, so I'm going to select again the cow scatter, and I'm going to be selecting the add icon and selecting the grass. Make sure to be pressing this icon again, because you can see that it's still on if I don't press it back. And that's pretty annoying sometimes. Okay, so now let's go into the scattering option. So let me just make this a bit bigger. So first of all, we have the 2D on surfaces scattering. So I'm using a plane, so it makes sense to use a 2D surface. So I can also use this 2D on surfaces option to scatter my grass on a spline. So let's go to our splines and create a rectangle. So I'm also going to be adding this rectangle to my cow scatter. Let's go to its modifiers, and now on distribute objects, I'm going to go ahead and add this rectangle here. So you can see that this rectangle has also been used to scatter this around, and this is pretty helpful when we have a plain surface and not much is going in there. So for instance, sometimes we would have asphalt and we would want to distribute some dry leaves on it. I would be just creating this type of spline to do that. Alright, so now let's deselect the positive icon there, and now I'm going to be deleting this rectangle from my list. I'm going to go ahead and select this rectangle and press this negative icon. Okay, so inside of here I also have the 1D on splines. So if I have a line of trees, I would use just a line. And for this example, let's bring a tree from the cow's Cosmos. So let's open the Cosmos browser. Let's go to vegetation and now trees. Let's have another look at our reference just to grab a tree that gets close to this scene. Okay, we can grab this one, which is the Scott Spine 3, and let's download it. Now let's import it to our scene. And here we go. Let's grab it and bring it down. Now by using this, I'm going to be distributing this tree to this line. Let's grab our cow scatter, and now let's actually add this line to our list. So let's go ahead and do that. Now deselect this add icon, and I'm going to be instancing this object right here. So because we're using a 2D on surface option, this will not work. So we have to change this from 2D to 1D. Okay, so we actually have a bunch of trees there, and you can also see that these are proxies, which can reduce the number of polygons and vertices significantly. So this is the advantage of using a chaos scatter. Now let's keep on going. I'm actually going to stay with the 2D for now, and let's just get rid of this line from our list and also this Scots pine for now. Okay, so now we have the max limit and we have a total of 1 million, so we can't actually pass that number of our distributed objects on our meshes. Let's leave it as it is. The random seed will actually create some other types of distribution. So if we don't like how everything is being distributed, we can try and change the random seed to see if we like another one. And for now, because this is grass, we don't really need to have a different random seed. So let's leave it as it is. Okay, so our temporal consistency will also help us maintain everything really nice and uniform, because sometimes our proxies, in this case, or our 3D models that are being distributed on this mesh, will start to pop in certain spaces that make no sense. So having this on is a good idea. Now, avoid collisions is pretty straightforward. It will avoid for any collisions from the 3D models that are on our mesh to crash with each other. So because this is grass that we're doing, we need to have this disabled. Now we have the edit instances, and before chaos scatter, we had the corona scatter. So this is new from Corona 8, and sometimes a certain 3D asset, especially with trees, were in the wrong place. So for example, if we go to our reference, we would scatter some trees in here, and this tree would be, let's say, on the middle, and that would ruin our whole scene. So now with this option, we can literally just grab this tree, let's say, and just move it to the side so that it would not be right on our center of our scene. Okay, so this is a pretty helpful tool. We can also convert to max geometry. So as you can see, we have all of these proxies that are actually our grass, but they're only being represented as boxes. So if we convert these to max geometry, there's a note there which says this is usable only for small number of objects. Because if I turn this to a max geometry, having thousands of little hairs from our grass, it's going to just consume a lot of memory, and our computer might not handle it and therefore crash our system. So in here, inside our scatter list, we can actually just check some of our options that we've already gone through. For example, the way that this is displayed. We can also see the number of models that are being displayed on our scene. So these are pretty much the same options that we have at the right side. We also have the camera clipping. So this is actually pretty nice to have, because when we enable it, we will have this scattering only happen within our camera range. So we can actually tell it that we have the Corona 02 in here. So if we pick it, you can see how all of our scattering now are only concentrated on that specific view, making our scene a little bit lighter. We can also control the view of this. Let's go ahead and type in 500. You can see that it will start to ignore that camera clipping tool. Okay, so now let's just leave it at 10 for now. And now let's go to our surface scattering, which is one of the parameters that are mostly used. So in here, 1000, it's going to be a very low number for grass, because basically grass covers lots of area on our geometries. Therefore, we need lots of them because their hairs are pretty small, right? For now, I'm going to just use 10,000, and that's going to be more than enough. We can also go per square, but I don't suggest you to use this. We can also add a map. So for example, if we use a dirt map, only on our white parts of our dirt map, we will have the grass scattered. We can also use a UV map for this, but in this case, we're only going to be sticking with our mesh. Down here, we have the slope limitation. So on our slope limitation, we will actually limit the amount of assets that are being distributed on a mesh that has certain slopes. So if the slope goes from 0 to 180 degrees on angle, our assets are only going to be distributed in that space. So if we just reduce this to, let's say, 5 degrees, you can see that now they are not distributing on our slopes that have more than 5 degrees in angle. So let's just leave it as it was. 180 degrees will be fine. Okay, now the transformations. So this is where it gets a bit interesting, because remember that nature is random. So we need to create randomness also on our 3D assets that we are distributing right now. So we can actually tell to randomize the X, Y, and Z dimensions. But because it's grass, again, we won't be needing to do this much because it's not going to be very noticeable. What really matters here is to have this rotation. So here in Chaos Scatter, we already have this 360 degrees set. So it's going to randomize each of our 3D assets from 1 degree to 360 degrees in rotation. So let's actually go and start our interactive render, and you're going to notice something funny when that happens. However, let's go ahead and do that. And this scene, it's way too bright, so let's go ahead into our material editor and let's do something about this brightness. So I'm actually going with a 5, and for us to have a little bit more of visibility here, I'm going to exclude our grass from our material override. So let's go ahead and pick our grass. Now let's go to our render setup, and within our scene I'm going to exclude this geometry. Let's go into this viewport first and render setup, and I'm going to lock our rendering by using this icon right there. Start interactive. Okay, so we have our grass here. So let's actually take a better look at it. I'm going to press my P key and have a closer look at one of our assets there. So in this case, our grass is actually facing the wrong direction. And this is better seen with our proxies because our grass is supposedly horizontal. So there's a small error here with Quixel that when it imports some assets, they're imported in the wrong direction. So we have to fix that. And there's actually an easy fix to it. We need to go back here, and what is happening right now is that our Chaos Scatter is actually reading this geometry as if it was in a vertical way like this. So it's distributing this 3D asset like this. This is why our proxies have this type of directionality. Again, there's an easy fix to this. We only have to go into our utilities, and down here we have the reset X form. So the position in which the grass is at this moment, which is horizontal, is going to be reset from the current position that our Chaos Scatter is reading this. So let's just reset it by pressing here reset X form and then reset selected. You can see that now our grass is no longer vertical but horizontal. It's looking normal now. Okay, now let's go back to our scene there. So C for camera, and let's pick our camera 2 there. Let's go ahead and start the interactive render again. Alright, so this is looking way better. Now let's go back to our Chaos Scatter. Okay, now let's go all the way down here. And now let's have a good look at our proxies. If I just typed in 0 here, you can see that all of my grass assets are facing the same direction. So this is going to be very weird to see because all of the hairs from the grass are actually all different. So if I go ahead and type in 360, we will have a randomization from 0 to 360 degrees. So this looks way more natural. And let's just see if we can grab this on our interactive render. And because we have this irregularity on our terrain, it also helps for this randomization to happen. So let's go ahead and just start one. And again, because we have our terrain irregular, this is not really that noticeable. However, trust me when I tell you that it's better to have this random rotation on. So we're getting closer and closer to reality with this kind of parameters. Okay, now let's just go ahead down here to our rotation and 360. Okay, now we have the step in angle. So if we type in a value here, it's going to start to make a continuous randomization each certain amount of degrees. So if I just press a 5 in here and I want this to happen on my x-axis, this will produce that each 5 degrees this randomization will start to happen. So let's say that I put in 5 right now, as you can see. Now our next randomization on degrees will be 10, and then 15, and then 20, and then 25, and so on. So we don't really need this to be active because, as I told you before, it's more than enough to have this value here. This is just for very specific purposes, and it's very rare for you to use this step in angle. What we do use is the normal versus the z-axis. So if I just go ahead and add our tree to our mesh, so I'm going to add my tree to this list, okay, and I'm actually going to be copying this cow scatter so that we can see it better. Let's get rid of this tree on this list. Okay, and let's actually erase the grass from this list over here. Okay, you can see that I have way too many trees. So let's go up here to the count number, and instead of 10,000 trees, I'm actually just going to have around 50 or 10. Okay, so you can see that the shape of my trees are a bit weird. So let's go ahead to our scene, and I'll be also excluding this tree from my material override list. So let's go into our scene and exclude it. Let's go back to our camera and start the interactive. Alright, so this is something funny because our trees are actually tilting like this. So let's go ahead and look at our reference, and you can see that the trees in the left side, even though we have a slope, they're still growing in a vertical way. So this is the way that nature acts, because trees are actually trying to go in a vertical way to grab more sunlight, right? So we need to fix that. And the way to do that is by telling our cow scatter that in our z-axis, we want these trees to be straight. So let's go back to our cow scatter. And all the way down here where we were just adjusting that parameter, we have the normal versus z. So this actually goes from 0 to 1. Let's just type in 1. And you can see how my trees have straightened up. You can see this tilt, which is very weird for this to be happening in real life. So let's just leave it at 1 right there. Now let's have another look at our interactive render. Okay, so this is looking way better. Alright, now let's go back to our cow scatter. And let's go all the way down here. And now we can also start manipulating the scaling. So the scaling is something really important that you should keep in mind, because it's going to look way more natural to have different scales on our geometries. So again, we wouldn't have 100 trees on a forest with the same height. That would just look weird. So the scaling here is going to make that more natural. So let's go ahead and type in that the grass, in this case, is going to be 80% of the scale on the x-axis, which is okay. And then we would have a range between 80 and let's put in here 120. So many of my grass is going to have only 80% of their original scale, and some of them 120%. So this will create a very nice randomness. Let's also apply this to our trees, in which we're going to be appreciating it a little bit better. So in here, I'm going to type in 60, and then we can just keep it at 100 So we're going to have a variation of heights between 60% of their scale and 100. Okay, now we have the exclusion options. So this is very important, and this is actually new for the Corona 8. So what if I didn't want our grass to be distributed in certain parts? So let's go again to our reference. We can see that our grass is actually just here on our foreground, and then there's this path, and we have this small patch of grass over here. So what I actually want to tell the chaos scatter is to exclude our grass from where my path is. So that's actually very easy to do. So let's go ahead to our top view, and now let's grab our splines. So let's go to this spline and create a line. So this line will actually help me to tell chaos scatter where I do not want this grass to be. So I'm going to create a line from here to here, and then from this point to this point here. So you can see that I'm just following that kind of path that we have here in our reference, which is this L-shaped. We can actually just do this with one single spline, but it's okay if we just leave it like it is. Now let's go ahead into our chaos scatter, and all the way down here again, we would have that our spline excludes. So we're going to be excluding this area with these two splines. So I'm going to pick the lines like this. Okay, now there's not much difference because we also need to play with our values from near and far. So each of these splines have these values. So let's just select the first line here, which is the horizontal one. For you to see it better, I'm going to isolate this. So let's pick these geometries, and also with my chaos scatter. So Alt+Q there. And now let's go inside our tool all the way down here again. And let's pick this first line, which is our horizontal one. So let's say that I want this to be 100. This means that we're going to be creating a 1 meter invisible offset parallel to our line in which the grass will not be distributed. So let's go ahead and say 500 centimeters. And you can see that the grass starts to get smaller and smaller. So if I also start reducing the scale from the grass, I'll be making this exclusion more noticeable. Okay, I can also grab the second line, which is the vertical one over here, or in the other direction as you want to see it. And I want to exclude this 5 meters into my line like this. Also, I can reduce the scale to make this a little bit more noticeable. And now let's go back to our interactive render. All right, so this looks pretty nice. And these splines that I created, you can see that they actually can be anywhere on my z-axis. It doesn't matter if they're up or down, as long as they are in our z-axis, they will be projecting down here to this mesh. Now we can add an extra detail for our ground. So I'll be heading to my Quixel bridge, and I'm going to my local. So inside my local is where I have all of my downloaded assets, and I'm going to go for a ground. So I'm going to go to my surfaces and find a ground, and I'm going to just apply a forest floor to my surface here. So I'm going to just import it, and you can see how Quixel Bridge makes my life a lot easier. So let's go to Material Editor, right click, select tree, and here's my imported material. I'm just going to add a Corona triplanar to this, like so, on my X value, and I'm going to exclude this surface from my material override. Okay, let's start the interactive render. And right click on hide all, and I need to hide the back, which is my plans. Okay everyone, so now you know how simple it is to create a terrain, and playing around with chaos scatter, we can distribute objects to make it look realistic. Thanks as always. I'll talk to you soon.